I never thought Christmas Eve would end with me lying frozen in the snow outside my childhood home, while my family inside just carried on with dinner like nothing happened. At 32, I was an ER nurse trained to save lives, but nothing could have prepared me for the moment my own father shoved me out of that second-floor window. As the curtains closed above me and the temp dropped to -10, I faced a chilling truth. No one was coming to save me. I need to explain who I am before I tell you what happened that night, because without that context, none of this makes sense. This is not just a story about one moment. It is about a lifetime leading up to it. My name is Emily. I was 32 years old when this happened. For over a decade, I worked as an emergency room nurse. I spent my adult life standing in trauma bays, holding pressure on wounds, calming people who thought they were about to die, and making split-second decisions when everything was on the line. I had seen blood, loss, panic, and grief up close. I knew how fragile the human body could be. I also knew how strong it could be. At least I thought I did. From the outside, my life looked steady. I lived on my own. I paid my bills. I had a career that demanded resilience and focus. People trusted me when they were at their most vulnerable. Friends used to tell me I was calm under pressure, that I had a way of holding things together when others fell apart. I believed that version of myself too. What most people did not know was how much effort it took to stay that composed. Going back to my childhood home was never part of my plan. Life just backed me into a corner. A workplace injury forced me into medical leave. My savings disappeared faster than I expected. Rent in Seattle does not wait for recovery. When every option closed one by one, returning home became the only move left, even though every part of me resisted it. Walking back into that house felt like stepping into an old version of myself I thought I had outgrown. The confident nurse disappeared. The capable adult faded. In her place stood someone quieter, more careful. Someone who measured every word and movement without even realizing it. That shift alone should have warned me. What hurts the most is not just the fall. It is the realization that no amount of education, independence, or professional success automatically protects you from old wounds. Trauma does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits patiently, buried under routine and responsibility, until you are vulnerable enough for it to resurface. I tell this story because people assume strength looks loud. They assume survival means you stop hurting once you leave a bad environment. That is not how it works. Pain does not disappear just because you learn how to function around it. Even now, talking about this still tightens my chest. Not because I doubt what happened, but because it forced me to see the truth about my past, my family, and the limits of endurance. This story hurts because it stripped away every illusion I had left. And because surviving it changed me forever. From the outside, the house looked normal. That is the part people never understand. It sat quietly at the end of a snow-covered road, lights glowing warm through the windows, decorated just enough to look festive without trying too hard. Neighbors saw a successful man, a tidy home, and a family that kept to itself. Nothing about it screamed danger. Inside was a different story. That house ran on silence, not comfort. You could feel it the moment you stepped through the door. Conversations were measured. Laughter was controlled. Every sound felt like it needed permission. Even as an adult, I found myself walking softer, closing doors more gently, instinctively shrinking without knowing why. My father ruled that space without ever raising his voice. He did not need to. Control lived in his expectations, his looks, the way he could stop a room cold just by standing still. Approval was rare and conditional. One wrong move, one wrong tone, and the air would shift. Not explosive. Worse. Heavy. Suffocating. Fear did not come from chaos. Came from predictability. Denise, my stepmother, perfected the art of politeness. In front of others, she was warmth and smiles, always quick to smooth things over. Behind closed doors, that warmth vanished. Her silence carried judgment. Her comments came wrapped in sweetness but landed sharp. She never raised her voice either. She did not have to. She simply aligned herself with power and let it do the damage. Then there was Lily. Younger. Observant. Learning early which side to stand on. She mirrored what she saw. Praise flowed to her freely, and she knew it. That house taught her something dangerous without ever saying it out loud. Survival meant compliance. Safety came from pleasing the right person. Growing up there trained me to stay alert. I learned to read footsteps, door sounds, breathing patterns. I knew when it was safer to disappear into my room, and when it was expected that I show my face. Love felt transactional. Peace felt temporary. There were no locks on doors, but privacy never existed. There were no bruises to point to, no dramatic scenes anyone would believe. Just constant tension, quiet correction, emotional pressure that never let up. By the time I left at 18, I believed distance alone would fix everything. And for a while it did. I built a life far away and convinced myself I had escaped. What I did not understand was that the house had trained me too well. Its rules lived inside me long after I stopped living there. Returning years later cracked something open. The walls still held the same energy, the same unspoken warnings, the same feeling that safety was fragile and conditional. That house never felt safe because it was never meant to be. It was not built on love. It was built on control. And control, when quiet, is the hardest thing to see until it is too late. Control did not arrive in my childhood as shouting or chaos. It arrived slowly, dressed as discipline, responsibility, and concern. By the time I was old enough to question it, it already felt normal. My father believed structure built strength. That was the explanation he offered for everything. Schedules were strict. Expectations were precise. Mistakes were treated as personal failures rather than part of learning. I learned early that doing something almost right was the same as doing it wrong. Praise came sparingly and disappeared the moment I reached for it. What shaped me most was not what he said, but how he watched. His silence carried weight. A look could stop me mid-sentence. Disapproval did not need words. It lived in the pause before a response, the sigh that followed, the way his attention withdrew without explanation. I became skilled at anticipating moods because anticipation felt safer than surprise. After my mother died, the rules tightened. Grief was inconvenient in that house. Sadness lingered too long, cried too loudly, or took up too much space. I learned to swallow it. I learned to function. That became the expectation. Be strong. Be quiet. Do not make things harder. Denise reinforced this without ever saying it directly. She framed control as concern. She corrected how I spoke, how I dressed, how I reacted. Always calmly. Always with a smile that never reached her eyes. If I pushed back, she would say I was sensitive. If I stayed silent, she praised my maturity. That word followed me everywhere. Mature. Responsible. Easy. Those labels sound positive until you realize they were given to a child who learned not to ask for comfort. Lily watched all of this. She learned quickly which behaviors earned affection, and which earned distance. I do not blame her for choosing safety. That house rewarded alignment, not empathy. Over time, control rewired how I saw myself. I apologized automatically, even when I had done nothing wrong. I doubted my instincts. I assumed discomfort was my fault. I worked harder than necessary because rest felt undeserved. Even joy came with guilt attached, like I needed permission to feel it. Leaving for college felt like freedom, but the patterns stayed. I chose demanding environments. I thrived under pressure. Emergency medicine made sense to me because chaos was honest. It did not pretend to be calm while quietly hurting you. What I did not recognize was how deeply that conditioning ran. Control had taught me endurance, yes, but it also taught me silence. It trained me to tolerate situations longer than I should. It convinced me that discomfort was something to manage, not escape. That is the damage quiet control does. It does not break you all at once. It reshapes you slowly, until you confuse survival with strength. By the time I returned to that house years later, the pattern was already set. I slipped back into old roles without realizing it. Careful. Grateful. Small. Control shaped my childhood by teaching me how to disappear without leaving. And that lesson nearly cost me everything. Coming back was not a decision made with confidence. It was a decision made with numbers, deadlines, and quiet panic. The kind that settles in your chest when every option disappears one by one. The injury happened fast. One wrong movement during a chaotic shift, a sharp pain in my hand, and suddenly my career was paused. Surgery followed. Then physical therapy. Then waiting. Medical leave does not protect you from rent. Savings drain quietly. Bills do not care how hard you worked before everything fell apart. I told myself it would be temporary. Just long enough to heal. Just long enough to stabilize. That is how I justified it. Seattle had become unforgiving without a paycheck. Friends were supportive, but support has limits. I hated the idea of asking for help more than I hated the idea of going back. That alone should say something about how deep the conditioning ran. When my father offered the house, it came wrapped as generosity. He spoke calmly, reasonably. He said it made sense. He said family helped family. He did not say the rest out loud, but I heard it anyway. His house. His rules. His control. I convinced myself I was different now. Older. Stronger. More aware. I believed experience had armored me against old dynamics. I told myself I could handle it because I had handled worse. I was wrong. The power imbalance was immediate. I had no lease. No income. No timeline I could fully control. Dependence shifts everything. Gratitude becomes obligation. Boundaries soften. Silence feels safer than resistance. Every day I stayed there. The gap between who I had become and who that house expected me to be grew wider. I felt it in small moments. The way my father commented on my schedule. The way Denise monitored the space I took up. The way Lily spoke without hesitation while I chose my words carefully. I minimized it. That was my mistake. I told myself discomfort did not equal danger. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself survival meant endurance, not escape. Those thoughts were familiar. Comfortable. Wrong. What trapped me was not just money. It was pride. Shame. The fear of admitting I needed help in a way that felt like failure. I had built a life around independence. Losing it felt unbearable. So I stayed. I complied. I waited for my body to heal while my instincts grew quieter. Looking back, I see the truth clearly. Going back was never about weakness. It was about circumstance colliding with old patterns. It was about stepping into a space where control already knew my shape. I came back because I thought I had no choice. And because control works best when it convinces you that leaving is impossible. Christmas Eve in that house was never about comfort. It was about presentation. About appearing polished, successful, and complete. That year, the effort felt heavier than usual, like the house itself was holding its breath. The decorations went up early. Lights lined the windows. The table was set with precision. Every place perfectly aligned. Denise moved through the kitchen with controlled energy, adjusting things that were already fine. Nothing could be out of place. Not the plates. Not the conversation. Not the people. I felt it immediately. That quiet pressure to stay invisible. My father had invited guests. Business associates. People he wanted to impress. Their presence turned the evening into a performance. Laughter had to sound effortless. Stories had to land just right. Any crack in the image would be noticed. I was the crack. Not intentionally. Just by existing. I stood in the background helping where I was told. Careful with my injured hand. Careful with my tone. I chose a simple dress. Nothing attention-grabbing. Nothing that could be criticized. I wanted the night to pass without incident. I needed it to. From the outside it looked warm. Candlelight. Music playing softly. Smiles exchanged across the table. Anyone walking by would have assumed this was a picture-perfect holiday evening. Inside me something felt off. It always does when false calm settles in too neatly. When everyone is trying too hard. When silence follows laughter just a beat too long. Denise corrected small things. Where I placed a dish. How long I lingered. Each adjustment was polite, but the message was clear. This night was not about me. It never was. Lily seemed energized by the attention. Confident. Comfortable. She moved easily through conversations while I measured my presence carefully. That contrast stung more than I expected. My father watched everything. Not openly. Casually. As if nothing mattered. But I knew that look. I had known it my whole life. It was the look that meant I was being evaluated. Dinner began smoothly. Conversations flowed. Compliments were exchanged. I relaxed just enough to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe this time would be different. That was the illusion. Calm before a storm is dangerous because it convinces you to lower your guard. It makes you believe the ground is stable when it is not. The night was never meant to include me as an equal. I was there to fill space, not to belong. To complete the image, not to be seen. And when perfection demands silence, the smallest disruption becomes unforgivable. That evening felt perfect on the surface. but it was built on something fragile. And fragile things break loudly. It did not start with shouting. It started with a comment that sounded harmless enough to anyone listening casually. That is how it always happens. Control prefers subtlety. One of the guests asked what I was doing now, the question floating across the table with polite curiosity. Before I could answer fully, Lily stepped in, smiling wide, her tone light but deliberate. She mentioned my injury. Mentioned that I was not working at the moment. Mentioned it just loudly enough for everyone to hear. The table went quiet. I felt the heat rise in my face instantly. Not because the truth embarrassed me, but because it had been exposed without my consent. I forced a calm smile. I explained briefly. Temporary setback. Healing in progress. I kept my voice steady, professional, reasonable. Denise laughed softly. Not unkindly. Not obviously cruel. She added a small comment about how hard it must be to lose momentum. How difficult it can feel when things slip out of your hands. Her words landed exactly where they were meant to. I felt smaller with every second the attention lingered. My father said nothing. He did not need to. His silence carried disappointment like a weight pressing down on my chest. I knew that look. I had spent my childhood trying to avoid it. Then he asked me to pour the wine. I hesitated for half a second. My hand was still healing. He knew that. Everyone at that table knew it. But refusing would have drawn attention. So I reached for the bottle. My grip tightened instinctively. Pain flared. The bottle slipped just enough for a splash of red wine to stain the tablecloth. It was barely anything. A simple accident. The reaction was immediate. Denise gasped. Lily froze dramatically. One of the guests looked away, uncomfortable. The room shifted as if something fragile had shattered. I apologized quickly. Reached for a napkin. Tried to fix it. My father stood up. His chair scraped sharply against the floor, the sound slicing through the silence. He grabbed my arm, firm but controlled, and muttered that I was humiliating him. Not us. Him. That word burned. Humiliation. In front of his guests. In his house. On Christmas Eve. I tried to explain. Quietly. Reasonably. But explanations were never what he wanted. What he wanted was obedience. What he felt was wounded pride. The embarrassment was not mine. It was his. And in that moment I understood something with terrifying clarity. I was not a daughter at that table. I was a liability. A flaw in a carefully curated image. Being corrected in private is painful. Being corrected publicly changes everything. It strips away any illusion of safety. As he pulled me toward the stairs, the room remained silent. No one intervened. No one questioned it. Humiliation does not always shout. Sometimes it escorts you quietly out of the room, while everyone pretends nothing is wrong. And that walk upstairs was the last moment my life still resembled normal. The moment we reached the second floor, the noise from downstairs disappeared. Laughter, cutlery, music. All of it faded behind the closed door, leaving a silence that felt heavy and familiar. This was the kind of quiet I had learned to fear. My father released my arm but did not step away. He stood too close, close enough that I could feel the tension radiating off him. His voice stayed low, controlled, almost calm. That made it worse. He told me I had embarrassed him. He said I always found a way to ruin things. He said I never knew when to stay in my place. Each sentence landed carefully, like he had rehearsed them long before that night. I tried to respond evenly. I said it was an accident. I said my hand was injured. I said I was doing my best. My words sounded reasonable, measured, adult. None of that mattered. He stepped closer, his presence filling the narrow space. He accused me of wanting attention, of enjoying the moment, of making him look weak in front of people who mattered. His voice never rose, but the anger underneath it was unmistakable. This was not about wine. This was about control slipping. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger. Not fear. Exhaustion. A deep bone-heavy exhaustion from carrying this dynamic my entire life. From apologizing for existing. From shrinking to preserve peace that never lasted. And for the first time I did not soften my response. I told him I was tired. I told him I was not trying to compete with his image. I told him quietly that I was not his shadow. The words hung in the air. That sentence was small, simple, but it changed everything. His expression hardened instantly. The calm vanished. In its place was something raw and unfiltered. Not shock, not regret, rage. I realized too late what I had done. In that house, independence was defiance. Speaking plainly was rebellion. Naming the truth was unforgivable. He moved suddenly. I had no time to react. No time to step back. 1 second I was standing on the landing, the next I felt pressure against my shoulders. The window behind me loomed closer than I understood in that moment. There was no shouting, no warning, no dramatic pause, just a decision made in anger. And in that private space, far from witnesses, far from reason, the sentence that finally named my freedom became the trigger that nearly ended my life. No one downstairs saw it. No one heard it. And that silence would echo longer than any scream ever could. Everything happened faster than my mind could keep up. 1 second I was standing there still trying to process what I had said. The next, the world tilted in a way that made no sense. I felt a sudden force at my shoulders, sharp and deliberate, and then the ground was no longer beneath my feet. There was a sound like breaking ice. Cold air rushed toward me, stealing my breath before I could scream. The warmth of the house vanished instantly, replaced by something brutal and unforgiving. My body moved without permission, falling into darkness as the night swallowed me whole. The impact knocked the air out of my lungs. Not pain first. Shock. A heavy, crushing stillness that pinned me in place. For a moment I could not tell where I was or how I had landed. Snow pressed against my skin, hard and icy, nothing like it looks from above. Then I tried to move. My body did not respond. That was when fear arrived. Not loud. Not frantic. Cold and precise. I stared up at the broken window above me, its edges jagged against the light. For a brief second I saw my father's outline. He did not shout. He did not rush forward. He simply stood there looking down. And then the curtains closed. The light disappeared. That was the moment it hit me. I was not just hurt. I was abandoned. The realization settled deeper than the cold. This was not an accident someone would rush to fix. This was a choice. A decision to turn away. A decision that left me alone in the dark, unable to move, unable to call for help. The silence was overwhelming. Inside the house, life continued. I could hear faint movement, distant voices, the muffled sounds of dinner resuming as if nothing had changed. As if I had not just vanished from the evening entirely. My training kicked in automatically. Stay still. Assess breathing. Do not panic. Panic wastes energy. But logic struggled against the truth pressing down on me. I was outside, injured, exposed, and no one was coming. The cold began to seep deeper, settling into places I could not shake it from. My thoughts slowed. My chest tightened. Every breath felt thinner than the last. Lying there, staring at the place I had just been thrown from, I understood something with terrifying clarity. I was no longer safe. Not in that house. Not with that family. Not anywhere near the man who was supposed to protect me. And realizing that changed everything. The cold did not rush in all at once. It crept. At first it felt sharp, almost manageable, like pins pressing into my skin. I focused on breathing, slow and deliberate, the way I had taught patients to do when panic threatened to take over. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Stay present. Stay awake. The snow beneath me was harder than it looked, packed solid from days of freezing temperatures. It pressed into my back and shoulders, stealing warmth with every second. I could feel it seeping through the thin fabric of my dress, settling against my skin like a warning. I tried to move my fingers. One hand responded weakly. The other did not. That scared me more than the fall. My mind shifted into survival mode without asking permission. Check your breathing. Still there. Check your legs. Heavy, numb, but present. Do not move your spine. Do not panic. Panic burns energy you do not have. The wind brushed across my face, slicing and relentless. Each gust felt like it carried the message deeper into my bones. You are exposed. You are alone. I stared at the dark sky above me, blinking slowly as frost gathered on my lashes. Time began to feel strange. Stretched. Warped. Seconds dragged like minutes, and minutes slipped away without warning. I could not tell how long I had been there. That uncertainty gnawed at me. Inside my head, thoughts came in fragments. This cannot be happening. Someone will notice. They have to notice. I listened for footsteps. A door opening. My name being called. Nothing. Instead, I heard faint sounds from inside the house. Laughter, muted and distant. The clink of dishes. Music drifting softly through the walls. Normal life continuing just a few feet away from where I lay frozen and still. That was when a deeper fear settled in. Not fear of dying. Fear of being ignored. I realized I had always believed, even through everything, that there was a line my father would never cross. That when it mattered most, something human would intervene. That belief dissolved quietly in the cold. My thoughts turned inward, circling memories I had buried. Moments from childhood. Times I stood outside waiting. Times I was punished with silence instead of words. I understood then how familiar this felt. Being left. Being unseen. Being expected to endure. My teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. I tried to steady my jaw, knowing what that meant. Early hypothermia. I had treated it. I had warned others about it. Knowing the process did not make it less terrifying. I whispered my name under my breath, grounding myself. I listed facts. Age. Profession. Where I was. What had happened. Anything to keep my mind anchored. But another thought kept pushing through. What if this is it? What if this is how it ends, quietly, while the world carries on without me? I forced my eyes open wider, fighting the heaviness pulling at them. Sleep felt tempting. Dangerous. Warm in a way that scared me. I told myself one thing again and again. Stay awake. Just stay awake. I did not know how long I could keep that promise. And somewhere deep inside, a question took shape, refusing to let go. If no one comes, how long can I survive on my own? Time stopped behaving normally after a while. It no longer moved forward in a straight line. It stretched, folded in on itself, then disappeared altogether. I could not tell how long I had been lying there. Minutes felt endless. Hours felt imaginary. The cold changed too. It stopped biting and started numbing. That shift terrified me more than the pain ever had. I knew what it meant. I had seen it in patients. The body conserving energy. The mind drifting when it should not. Fear crept in quietly. Not as panic but as a steady pressure pressing against my thoughts. A voice that asked dangerous questions. What if you stop fighting? What if you rest for just a moment? I argued back in my head. No. Not yet. Not like this. I focused on small things. My breath. The faint rise and fall of my chest. The sound of wind moving through trees somewhere beyond the yard. I forced my fingers to twitch, even when the movement barely registered. Each tiny motion felt like a victory. Memories surfaced without warning. Not the dramatic ones. The ordinary ones. Coffee breaks between night shifts. Laughing with coworkers after a brutal trauma case. The feeling of walking home after a long day knowing I had helped someone survive. Those memories grounded me. Then came the harder ones. Childhood moments I had never named as painful before. Standing alone when I needed comfort. Being told I was strong when what I really needed was safety. Those memories hurt, but they also lit something stubborn inside me. I realized something important in that frozen stillness. I had survived my entire life by adapting, by enduring, by staying present when it would have been easier to disappear. That skill, the one that once kept me quiet, was now keeping me alive. The cold kept pulling at me, trying to blur the edges of my awareness. My thoughts slowed. Words felt heavier. I worried about losing track of myself. So I repeated facts like a lifeline. My name. My job. The date. I whispered them into the dark, anchoring myself to reality. At one point I felt tears freeze on my cheeks. I did not know if they were from fear or grief. Maybe both. There was a moment when doubt nearly won. When I wondered if fighting was pointless. If no one had come by now, why would they? That was when something shifted. Not hope. Resolve. I decided that if this was the night everything ended, it would not end quietly. I would stay conscious. I would stay present. I would not surrender to the cold without a fight. Those hours stripped away every role I had ever played. Daughter. Nurse. Adult. Survivor. What remained was something raw and undeniable. I wanted to live. And that realization changed me long before anyone arrived to save me. The first thing that reached me was sound. Not voices from the house. Not the wind. Something different. The crunch of tires slowing on snow. Faint at first, then clearer. I held on to that sound like a lifeline, afraid it might vanish if I let myself believe in it too soon. Light swept across the yard, cutting through the darkness. Headlights. Real ones. Close enough to feel warm against my frozen skin, even from a distance. My heart tried to race, but my body barely responded. A car door opened. Footsteps followed, hurried and uneven. I wanted to call out. I tried. Only a weak breath escaped my lips. The sound was barely there, but it was enough. A figure moved toward me. Then another. A voice cut through the night, sharp with panic and disbelief, calling my name. The moment someone said it out loud, my chest loosened for the first time in hours. Hands brushed snow from my face. Gentle. Careful. Too careful to be imagined. A coat was draped over me, heavy and warm in a way that almost hurt. I flinched instinctively as heat touched my skin. Someone kept talking, steady and low, telling me to stay awake, telling me I was not alone anymore. Their words grounded me more than the warmth. Another light appeared. Red and blue this time. Then voices layered over each other, calm but urgent. I recognized the rhythm immediately. Emergency responders. Real help. They moved with purpose, not panic. Fingers checked my pulse. A hand supported my neck. A blanket wrapped around me, sealing out the cold. Each step felt deliberate, controlled, safe. As they lifted me, pain flared briefly, then faded beneath relief. The night felt farther away with every movement. The house behind me disappeared from view, and with it, something else I could not quite name yet. Inside the ambulance, warmth surrounded me. Not just physical. Emotional. The kind that comes from being seen, believed, and cared for without conditions. A voice near my ear told me I had done the right thing by staying awake. That I had survived. That they had me now. I closed my eyes for a second, just long enough to breathe without fear. For the first time that night I felt safe. And I knew even then that nothing would ever be the same again. Survival does not arrive with celebration. It arrives quietly. After the lights, the voices, and the motion, there was stillness. Not the dangerous stillness of the snow, but a heavier one. The kind that settles in once your body understands it is no longer fighting for its life. The hospital room was dim. Machines hummed softly. Warmth surrounded me in layers, but my muscles remained tense, as if they had not yet received the message that the danger had passed. My body was safe. My mind was not convinced. Exhaustion settled deep beyond sleep. It felt emotional, cellular, like every part of me had been drained all at once. I did not cry. I did not panic. I simply stared at the ceiling, letting the reality seep in slowly. I was alive. That truth felt unreal. Nurses moved in and out with gentle efficiency. Their voices were calm, reassuring, familiar in a way that twisted something inside me. I had been on the other side of this so many times, telling patients they were safe now, watching their bodies come down from adrenaline. I never imagined I would be the one lying there, hollowed out by fear. When the room finally went quiet, the silence grew loud. Thoughts surfaced without warning. Not the fall itself, but everything around it. The closed curtains. The absence of footsteps. The sounds of dinner continuing while I lay outside. Those details replayed again and again, sharper now that I was no longer in survival mode. That was when the weight hit. Surviving did not erase what happened. Confirmed it. My chest felt tight, not from injury, but from the slow realization that someone had chosen not to help me. That truth hurt in a way no fracture ever could. It was not just physical harm. It was betrayal laid bare and impossible to ignore. I felt numb, then overwhelmed, then numb again. Emotions came in waves I could not predict. Relief crashed into grief. Gratitude tangled with anger. Fear lingered even in safety, like an echo that refused to fade. At some point I noticed how quiet my thoughts became. Not peaceful. Empty. As if my mind needed space to recover from what it had been forced to carry. Trauma does not announce itself with drama. Sometimes it simply leaves you staring at nothing, too tired to feel anything fully. I realized then that survival was only the beginning. Living would require something else entirely. Processing what happened would take time. Trust would not return quickly. Sleep would not come easily. I did not know that yet, not fully, but I felt the shift happening inside me. The silence after survival is deceptive. It looks calm, feels still, but it is where the real work begins. And in that quiet hospital room, wrapped in warmth but shaken to my core, I understood one undeniable truth. I had survived the night. Now I had to survive what came after. The truth does not always arrive with confrontation. Sometimes it surfaces quietly, piece by piece, until there is nowhere left for it to retreat. First, everything moved slowly. Questions were asked carefully. Statements were taken without pressure. I could feel how gently people were trying to approach the situation, as if they were unsure how much I could handle. What they did not realize was that the hardest part had already happened outside in the cold. What came next was clarity. Details began to line up in ways that could not be explained away. The broken window, the direction of the fall, the time that passed before help arrived. Each fact stood on its own, calm and unarguable. Together, they formed something undeniable. I did not have to raise my voice. I did not have to convince anyone. The evidence spoke clearly enough on its own. What shocked me most was not being believed. It was how quickly the story others tried to tell fell apart. Small lies unraveled under simple questions. Timelines shifted. Explanations contradicted themselves. What had once sounded confident suddenly sounded rehearsed. People noticed. There were records, footage, messages that should never have been sent. Casual words spoken earlier that night took on new weight when placed beside the truth. The image of a perfect evening could not survive scrutiny. For the first time, silence worked in my favor. I watched as authority figures did what I had waited my entire life to see. They did not minimize. They did not excuse. They did not soften what happened to make it easier to swallow. They looked at the facts and treated them as exactly what they were. Serious. That was when I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Validation. For years I had questioned my own perception. I had been taught to doubt my instincts, to assume fault, to accept discomfort quietly. Seeing the truth acknowledged by people who had no emotional attachment to the situation was grounding in a way I did not expect. The lies that once protected others suddenly became liabilities. Excuses collapsed under timelines. Silence became evidence. The story that had been carefully curated for public view could not survive daylight. I realized then how fragile deception really is. It depends entirely on everyone agreeing not to look too closely. Once someone does, it cannot hold. As more details came forward, the narrative shifted from confusion to accountability. What happened was no longer framed as an unfortunate incident. It was recognized as a sequence of choices. And choices have consequences. Sitting there, listening as the truth took shape without my interference, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief. Release. For the first time, the weight of carrying this alone lifted slightly. The truth was no longer hiding. And neither was I. Justice did not arrive loudly. It did not storm in or announce itself with dramatic gestures. It moved calmly, deliberately, and without emotion. That made it far more powerful. Once the truth was clear, the tone around everything changed. Conversations became formal. Decisions were documented. Processes moved forward without concern for comfort or reputation. What had once been protected by silence was now exposed to scrutiny, and there was no way to put it back. I watched it happen from a distance, physically still recovering, emotionally exhausted. I did not have to chase accountability. I did not have to demand it. It came on its own, driven by facts rather than feelings. That was the most unexpected part. People who had relied on control suddenly had none. Authority shifted away from the house, away from private narratives, and into spaces where manipulation did not work. There were questions that could not be avoided, actions that required explanation, records that did not forget. The image my father had built for years began to fracture. Not all at once. Slowly. Professionally. The way systems dismantle power without anger. That quiet unraveling felt more final than any argument ever could. Denise's careful composure cracked under pressure. Politeness stopped working when responsibility entered the room. The calm smiles disappeared when silence no longer protected anyone. Lily withdrew. I saw confusion there. Regret. A realization that aligning with control had consequences she was not prepared for. That part hurt more than I expected, but it also reminded me how cycles form and how easily they can repeat. My role in all of this was simple. I told the truth when asked. I stayed consistent. I did not minimize. I did not protect anyone who had not protected me. That was the revenge. Not rage. Not destruction. Boundaries. For the first time in my life, I did not rush to soften the impact of someone else's actions. I did not excuse behavior to keep the peace. I let consequences exist without interference. There is a strange power in that. Watching accountability unfold without needing to orchestrate it taught me something important. Justice does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like paperwork, professional language, and doors quietly closing. And sometimes that is enough. The people who believed they controlled the narrative learned a hard lesson. Control only works when silence cooperates. Once it does not, everything changes. I did not win anything that night. I reclaimed something. My voice. My credibility. My right to exist without fear. The consequences they never expected were not just legal or social. They were personal. They lost access to me. And that loss I knew would last far longer than any punishment written on paper. Healing did not happen all at once. It came in small, unremarkable moments that did not look like progress until I noticed how far I had come. Recovery was slow. My body needed time. My mind needed patience. Some days felt strong. Others felt fragile. I learned quickly that healing does not move in a straight line, and that did not mean I was failing. Distance became my first act of self-respect. I stepped away from everything that tied me to that house. Physical distance, emotional distance, and the kind of silence that protects rather than punishes. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped justifying choices that did not need approval. I let quiet become mine again. Independence looked different than it used to. It was not about proving strength or doing everything alone. It was about choosing safety without guilt. About asking for support without shame. About trusting myself enough to walk away from what hurt me, even when it felt unfamiliar. I returned to work slowly on my terms. My relationship with medicine changed. I still cared deeply, but I no longer measured my worth by endurance alone. Compassion, I realized, had to include myself. Therapy helped. Not because it erased the past, but because it gave language to things I had carried silently for years. Naming patterns loosened their grip. Understanding my reactions allowed me to respond instead of freeze. The most surprising part of healing was how ordinary it felt. Grocery shopping without tension. Sleeping through the night. Laughing without bracing for consequence. These moments were small, but they added up to something powerful. Peace. I rebuilt my life intentionally. I chose where I lived, who had access to me, how I spent my energy. I surrounded myself with people who did not demand silence in exchange for belonging. For the first time, my home felt safe. Not perfect, not untouched by memory, but mine. What they could not take from me was my ability to start again. Control loses power when it no longer has proximity. Fear fades when it is not constantly reinforced. I did not rebuild to prove anything to them. I rebuilt because I deserved a life that did not require shrinking. And every day I chose myself, I felt something settle inside me. A quiet certainty that what I survived would not define me forever. They no longer had access. They no longer had influence. And that freedom was stronger than anything they ever tried to take. Surviving changed how I understand power. For most of my life, I believed power belonged to the loudest voice in the room. The person who controlled space, money, or silence. I thought power meant authority. I thought it meant being feared. That belief shaped how I moved through the world, careful not to provoke it, careful not to lose what little safety I had. That night rewrote everything. Power did not belong to the man who pushed me. It did not belong to the house, the rules, or the fear I carried for years. It belonged to the choice I made in the cold when giving up would have been easier. Power was staying awake. Power was refusing to disappear. Power was surviving long enough for the truth to surface. I learned that real power does not need an audience. It does not announce itself. It exists quietly in boundaries, in self-respect, in the decision to stop protecting people who harm you. For a long time, I believed revenge meant confrontation or punishment. I imagined it as anger made visible. But what I discovered was something far more lasting. Inner revenge is freedom. It is choosing yourself without apology. It is refusing to carry shame that does not belong to you. It is living well in ways that deny control its reward. The moment I stopped explaining my worth, power shifted. The moment I stopped shrinking, fear lost its grip. The moment I accepted that I did not need permission to protect myself, everything changed. Surviving taught me that self-worth is not earned through endurance. It is inherent. No one has the right to take it, no matter how long they have convinced you otherwise. If there is one truth I carry forward, it is this. Power does not come from breaking others. It comes from refusing to be broken. And choosing yourself again and again is the strongest form of revenge there is. If you take nothing else from my story, take this. What happened to me did not start with a window or a fall. It started long before that, in moments where discomfort was normalized and silence was rewarded. That is how harm hides. Quietly. Respectably. Behind closed doors that look ordinary from the outside. I share this because I know how easy it is to doubt yourself when something feels wrong, but does not look dramatic enough to justify leaving. I know how often women are taught to endure, to stay polite, to keep the peace even when that peace costs them pieces of themselves. If you recognized yourself in any part of this, please hear me clearly. You are not weak for feeling uneasy. You are not dramatic for needing distance. You are not ungrateful for wanting safety. Strength is not staying in places that hurt you. Strength is listening to the quiet voice inside you that says something is off, even when everyone else tells you to ignore it. I also want you to know this. Survival does not always look brave in the moment. Sometimes it looks like staying quiet long enough to get through the night. Sometimes it looks like leaving without closure. Sometimes it looks like rebuilding slowly and perfectly on your own terms. And that is enough. If my story reached you, I hope it reminded you of your own worth. Not the version of you that performs well for others, but the version that deserves peace without conditions. You do not owe access to anyone who makes you feel small. You do not need permission to choose yourself. And you do not need to wait for things to get worse to take your life seriously. So I want to ask you one thing, and I hope you answer honestly, even if only to yourself. Have you ever ignored a quiet warning inside you, and what did it cost you in the end? If you feel safe sharing, your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.